The people of the country have spoken. So, a day after the election results, let's get a sense of how the world is perceiving the elections and the results in India. Let me bring in the chair, US India Policy Studies at CSIS, Richard Rossow. Many thanks for speaking with NDTV. My first question is with regards to Prime Minister Modi getting a third term, but his party's numbers coming down quite drastically, and with them not having a majority now depending on political allies. How do you see this panning out with regards to, say, decisions on security and foreign affairs related issues?
Yeah, on security affairs, I don't suspect you're going to see a dramatic change. I think the biggest drivers that were there before are still very much present, which is some of the dangerous elements of China's rise, continued security concerns about Pakistan. I don't think this is going to change India's position on Russia's invasion of Ukraine or Middle East. So I suspect that you're not going to see any dramatic shifts. And knowing the parties that are most likely to be part of the coalition, they've generally been sort of acquiescent in times past on international affairs too, unlike some of the other regional parties which have strong stakes, for instance, in India's relations with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, things like that. So I suspect on defense and security should be relatively status quo.
Many countries, especially in the West, were inclined to do business with India, considering that they believed that there was some amount of swiftness in decision making because of the majority that Prime Minister Modi's government had over the last two terms. With that now not present this time around, do you see differences in the manner in which decisions will be made on certain issues?
Well, I think, that really begins to be a bigger factor when we start talking about non-security related decisions. For instance, if the government is thinking about liberalizing FDI caps. Now, again, the Telugu Desam Party has been actually one of the most aggressive parties in all of India and trying to pursue foreign investment. Janata Dal United, Bihar hasn't been necessarily a magnet for foreign investment. So we don't exactly know, if Nitish Kumar, these decisions cross his table as a key member of the coalition, what that might look like. So there's some questions. Tough parliamentary reforms get a little bit more difficult. I mean, the Modi government never had a majority in the upper house of parliament, of course, but now having to face the challenge about rallying other parties in both chambers of parliament. So if they're thinking about making dramatic changes to streamline the goods and services tax or looking at the direct tax code or something like that, that gets a little bit more difficult because of the coalition. The third area, which I think does get more difficult, is looking at trying to work on cooperative competitive federalism. Some of the Modi government's earlier work, especially in the first term, on challenging states to do better and ranking states that don't always go well if suddenly regional parties that are in the coalition are getting low on the rankings. So some new pressures we may see with some of the competitive cooperative federalism. So on security, status quo, but on other areas of reform, yeah, there may be some slowdowns, maybe some reversals.
There are elections later this year in the US as well, and we are expecting that to be just as fiery, perhaps, as in India. Now, under these circumstances, with a changed government in India and with the impending elections in the US, do you see the second half of this year seeing a lull in the Indo-US relationship?
Yeah, I think they're looking at this summer for still trying to have some very senior bilateral summits, hoping that the National Security Advisor, who's had to postpone his trip to India a couple of times, maybe some other cabinet visits to engage the new government. But yeah, as we get closer to election time, a lot of the U.S. cabinet officials get involved in campaigning, the president himself, of course, as well as the vice president. So, some things will slow down. But, in times past, the governments have made the case that for critical leader level summits, you can carve out a weekend here and there. And I suspect because, again, some of the big delays we've had in the Quad leaders meeting, in the 2+2 dialogue, some things like that, they'll probably try to squeak a few of these in, but it definitely won't be the same intensity that we've seen during non-election cycles in the United States. Because, as of this point, it looks like our election, we're sort of expecting a tougher election than India faced. India's was a bit of a surprise, but we know already that ours is going to be a very challenging election.
My final question is with regards to the US elections yet again. Now, we do not know who's going to come to power. President Biden back again or Donald Trump. So, under these circumstances, what should we be expecting in the Indo-US ties? If there is a change in regime, do we see the relationship changing, or the relationship now has a momentum of its own, and is that likely to continue in a certain direction?
Yeah, I would say among some of my peers that work on other geographies, there's a little bit of jealousy, because we've already had a Trump administration, and India had some level of pride of place as a partner to engage. One of the rare visits that President Trump took overseas, of course, joining Prime Minister Modi for the big show down in Texas. You saw a deepening of defense relations. There were some trade tensions, and I try not to overlook the fact that we had a medium-scale trade fight during the Trump administration, kind of reacting to some of the protectionist instincts that we first saw from the Modi government. But overall, the leaders managed to find bonhomie and actually deeply worked on security ties in ways that we hadn't foreseen before that. So if Biden wins, if Trump wins, I think either way, security will be strengthened. If Trump wins, you may have some more tensions on trade, but as we saw before, that doesn't wreck the good things that are there on the table.
Richard Rossow, many thanks for speaking with NDTV.
Always a pleasure.